From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello everyone, from the state capitol here in Sacramento. I'm Brian Green and welcome to another edition of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities and policy and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. And we have with us right now a member of the California State Senate, welcoming back to the desk here, Senator Sen Yees from San Francisco, Senate District 8, also chair of the Senate Human Services Committee. Welcome, good to see you again.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely, always glad to have you back here. And it's just great to be able to have you back and talk about the legislative process as things roll along and bills have been introduced. The language is starting to form in the analysis and policy committees, and you're still actually introducing legislation. So
we are introducing legislation, but yet, as you indicate, the bills have been prepared, gone through Rules Committee and assigned to Policy Committee, and so we're starting next week, starting this week and next week, we're going to start having a lot of conversations about these bills now.
That's absolutely, and no light of day until May or June at this point. But well, let's actually first talk about one of the pieces of legislation you have just introduced in the last week or so. A place where particularly you can look and say there really ought to be a law about this, and this is the drop-in child care facilities that we see in a lot of the different malls and stores and fitness centers. I know, for example, IKEA has one, and you go shopping there. They're actually kind of neat little places. I'm sometimes tempted to tell my wife, you go shopping, I'm going to go sit in there and watch Lion King or something. But seriously, these are, by tradition, they're available for the convenience of the shoppers. They're popular, but the concern seems to be is that they are not regulated like your typical daycare center or child care center. So you have legislation that wants to change that. Tell us about your bill.
Well, this bill came because of an incident at a fitness center whereby a parent put her child into this kind of ancillary drop-in child care program so that she can exercise. And what we found was that there was not sufficient personnel there to protect the safety of this particular young individual. And so working with the industry, working with all kinds of different parties, we came up with a compromise piece of legislation whereby we set certain kinds of ratio required that those individuals who are 18 and above go through a background check if they're going to be supervising kids, and at least one individual within that group of individuals watching over those youngsters at least had to be 18, and then also getting enough training on health and safety matters. So when you then put these kids, your kids, into these kinds of drop-in child care center, that you know that there is going to be some safety measures in place for your youngsters.
Are there any local regulations, as you've done your prep and research for this, that you've seen where certain counties or communities have these kind of regulations? Obviously, it's patchwork because you need the state law.
Unfortunately not. This is a new phenomenon where you have these large facilities where a lot of individuals spend hours in there, and for the convenience of the customer, club members, you set up these kinds of drop-in facilities. And so nobody really thought that we needed some legislation to provide oversight and provide levels of services, quality of services. But now that this incident, it has really promulgated a lot of questions about, well, why shouldn't we have had something? And so this is what the bill does.
As you've prepared this legislation, what has been the reaction of some of these entities, the fitness centers or the different big box stores that have these for the convenience of the customers? What are they saying? Like, we agree with you, or is it just going to be more bureaucracy and hassle and cost for them?
Well, as any new piece of legislation would be, we have supporters and we have those individuals who have questions, and we're going to meet with everybody to try to iron out whatever the concerns may be. But ultimately, when we put kids in a facility, we should in fact assure parents and the kids that there is a level of safety when you're placed in these drop-in child care programs.
All right, one piece of legislation that's already been before Policy Committee and passed just recently as we speak. I know in a perfect world, legislators would love them all to pass, were it to be that easy, but one that actually is really there for the public service, making online voter registration available. This is Senate Bill 44. You authored legislation that made it available through the Secretary of State's office and their website last year. This year, you've expanded it even further. Tell us about it.
Well, we had a huge success when we authored the initial bill to cause online voter registration in the state of California through different websites of departments of election at the county level, and as you indicate, the Secretary of State website. We had over 800 new individuals register to vote in the November past election. It was just a huge number. And to try and capture even more individuals in the state of California to register to vote, our bill would require that any state website would also have a link to a voter registration website. And so this is really going to try and help more individuals to register to vote. The more individuals who register and actually vote, the better our democracy. To have the diversity of this state represented in the voter roll is really, really important. So I'm really pleased that we're able to get out of the policy committee. We will now go to, I think, one more policy committee, and we'll see what happens there.
Any concerns about fraud? I know oftentimes there's concern about the fraud when it comes to the actual process of voting, but what about the process of registering? Are you anticipating any of that? Have you seen problems with that in other states or in other places with this?
No, we haven't seen much problem with the original bill that we had on online voter registration. We match that particular database to the DMV database, and so that was sort of our security blanket to making sure that whoever was going to register to vote, that there would be backup information via the Department of Motor Vehicles database to ensure that the individual who says he is, whoever he is in fact that particular person. And so the same types of protection that is in the original online voter registration bill will be in place for this particular measure too.
You have authored a lot of legislation, have been a real advocate for transparency in the voting process and easier access to voting, even for students. You have another piece of legislation regarding registration at college campuses. I want to take you to Washington here with what's going on in a bigger picture about voting rights. The Supreme Court is considering, and may already have considered, that they are going to hear this session a challenge to a key section of the U.S. Voting Rights Act, the Section 5, which requires any states or local entities to get permission from the Department of Justice before they make any changes to their election law. And it affects a lot of areas in the South, even counties in this state, South Dakota as well, Manhattan, Brooklyn, where, anything, making sure that there's nothing racially motivated, looking back to some of the racial issues of the past. This was, of course, enacted in the 1960s. I know you know all this. I'm just kind of setting the scene for it. But the court is signaling, depending on the debate you listen to, that they could strike it down. There have been some that have called this racially motivated gerrymandering, that it could be entitlement for certain lawmakers, and some of the states are going, why do you think that we're more inclined to be racist than other states or other entities? What do you say to this issue as we talk about voting rights and access to voting? Have things changed for voters in the last 50 years? Is this law and its elements still valid here?
Well, Brian, you really provide a good synopsis of the history of this particular federal law. Unfortunately, in these days, we are still finding that there are efforts to thwart people to vote, to cast a ballot. And so I believe that the federal government still has a responsibility to protect everyone's ability to vote and be able to cast their vote and do it in a non-obtrusive way. I think the reality is that in this past election, we had in certain states in this union somewhat like a poll tax. We had lines upon lines, and what that meant was that if you happen to be poor, if you happen to be working on an hourly wage, that it costs you to just stand there to vote, because if you didn't get back to your job right away, you lost your wages, you lost money. And so we have now a modern day poll tax in some of the states in this union when it comes to voting. And we have to ask the question, is this new poll tax that we are looking at, is that a right thing to do? Should we make people wait for 4 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours in order to cast a vote? Threaten maybe losing your wage, maybe even losing your job. And so those are going to be impediments for poor individuals and other individuals from voting. And so I think that it is extremely important that the federal government maintains jurisdiction over states to making sure that there is no unfair and untoward activities into the individual's ability to vote.
So even a half a century later, we've been thankful for what that change and what that legislative legal mandate has done to access to voting. We can't get wobbly about it at this point.
No, you know, one of the most important rights that we have as a citizen in these United States is the ability to vote. When you vote, that means that you exercise your power to your government to say to your government that we are your boss, you're not the boss, and we will decide what is important, and we cast our vote to exercise what we think is right.
All right, taking you back here to Sacramento, continuing as you do to work out issues, concerns for humans here in the state, as chair of the Human Services Committee. The state's been through a lot. We're climbing out of a recession. We're seeing recovery, but there's still some chronic issues facing Californians, and one of them is this deep inset of poverty here in California.
Right.
We are, as what we've been told, we have the worst poverty rate in this nation. Even as we rebound, we're still leaving 1 million plus people behind. You and your colleague, the chair of the Assembly Human Services Committee, Assemblyman Mark Stone, recently had a hearing about this, talking to census experts, trying to get to the gist of this, looking at figures and seeing what's next. Tell us about the hearing and what some of the things that came out of this.
Well, what we had a hearing about was how do we define poverty? How do we measure poverty? We have a poverty measure index, but what a lot of demographers, sociologists, economists, members of the Census Bureau have said is that that index really doesn't reflect the true nature of one's poverty, and particularly in states like California where housing is so expensive and other basic necessities are so expensive that we ought to modify that index to take into account these additional variables. And out of that discussion, it turns out that we have a much higher rate of poverty than we originally thought. And I think that what that means is that we have now a greater responsibility of making sure that we take care of some of these other individuals, not in a way to just keep them in poverty, but to really be of assistance to them so that they can get out of poverty. And so this improved measure of poverty is going to be extremely important in the public policy making here in Sacramento.
And I suppose part of the pathway is the funding, continued funding or restoration of funding of some of the programs, the safety net at the local level that keeps people from falling into this situation or remaining into it. Is that happening? I mean, do you see this now? And is it going to get worse with sequestration on the federal level?
I've asked my staff on the committee to look at some of the cuts that have happened in the past, and I think everybody recognizes that that some of those cuts should never have happened, but because of the economic situation, the cuts were made. And now that we have a little bit more money, a little bit more breathing room, it is really incumbent as a moral imperative to then look at some of those cuts and how do we fix some of those cuts and bring back some of those services so that we can really help individuals get out of that situation of poverty, and so that they can be self-sufficient, they can be tax-paying individuals rather than being then a dependent on some of those tax revenues that help all kinds of individuals.
We have heard over the years, people have said sort of glibly and casually, oh, there's always going to be the homeless, oh, there's always going to be people in poverty. Do I take it that your attitude, and maybe the attitude obviously of your colleagues, is it shouldn't be that way?
No, when I was growing up and my parents raised me to always be concerned about those individuals who don't have as much as you do, and that never to forget them. No one wants to, when they wake up in the morning or when they are born into this earth, that they say, I want to be poor. I don't think anybody's saying so. But because of life situations that befall on them, that they are in that particular situation. So given appropriate resources, given appropriate training, given appropriate assistance, I think everybody can, in fact, get out of that state of homelessness, and that's what we ought to do. As a civilized society, that's our responsibility to help our fellow person, our fellow man, to get a better life. And the way to do that is through these kinds of programs that help them.
Great. obviously elections, this issue, others, a work in progress, but I know you're working on it.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much for praying. We'll do this again.
Always.
We'll have you come back, share some more of what's going on
Thank
here in
you
the
for having me.
legislature.
Thank
Thank you. Our guest, State Senator Leland Yee from the Bay Area, and that is it for this edition of Senate Spotlight. Please join us next time around as we discuss the important legislative issues and policies with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the Capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.